I know I want to be. I wanna be better. I don't wanna be better. So I'm letting go now.
All right, y'all. Welcome back to the Better Not Bitter podcast. I am your host, Maya Warren, and today I have a special guest. But before we introduce her, I first want to say I know it's been a while and a lot has happened, but you're going to see more content, more advocacy content, more traveling content, and just more conversations. So without further ado, I will allow my guest to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Maya Chupkov, and I am a podcaster. I am an advocate. I am a storyteller, and I am a lot of different things. I would also say I'm an entrepreneur, and one of my greatest, I guess, passion projects that I've been leading for about it's going to be to 2 years soon, is a podcast called Proud Stutter. I've had a lifelong stutter, and it's something that I've kept hidden until very recently. And I really started the podcast more for the stuttering community, but also for myself, because I always thought that my voice didn't really matter because of my stutter. And now I'm kind of just throwing that all away and starting a podcast about it. So that's a little bit about me.
Wow. So you said so many things in your intro that the wheels in my head are kind of turning. And that's because I can relate just to the concept of masking. Especially, at least in my journey, like I already stand out so much that there were several key points in my life where I was like, I don't want to draw any more attention to myself than I already naturally do. And so in your intro, you said something that kind of sparked a question for me. And you mentioned you got to a place a few years ago where you were like, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, do you mind talking about what that circumstance was and how that motivated you to start talking about it?
Yeah. So what really started me to start talking about it, because like when I tell you that I hit it, like I hit it so deep down, like even like when I would go to the therapy, I wouldn't even mention it because it was just something that I just didn't want to even bring up. Like it was just so it was very deep down there. And what really was the catalyst for me just like bringing it back up was I was so miserable in my job. It was the start of COVID. I just got a new job and I did not like it at all. Like it would cause me so much anxiety, and I was stuttering so much during that job. And I just got into like a really deep place. Like, am I ever going to be happy at my job? And like, it just, and so I was like, I need something to pull me out of this. And so podcasting, I always saw it as a low barrier to entry space. And so I was like, maybe that this will make me happier. And as I was thinking about what to talk about, my now husband, he said, he's always been very curious about my stutter, and he's like, you should do a podcast on stuttering. And I was like I would have never thought of that unless it was from him. And as soon as he said it, a light bulb went off, and I was like, wow, that's actually a good idea, but also scary. So it wasn't like I just woke up one day and I was like, I'm going to do a proud stutter. It took like that one moment and a few moments after that to really start it and like just put myself out there.
Wow. And the reason I say wow is, again, like I feel like I can relate to a lot of like key milestones or things that motivated you to be consistent in this journey? Because for those who don't know, like my YouTube channel started out with me doing song covers. And then I felt led to start sharing my story. And as soon as I felt that, and then I was like, no, let's not do that. And so a few months went by, and I was having like one of the worst bouts of chronic migraine in a while. And then it was kind of like one of those instances where I had a choice to allow it to make me better or bitter. Because I was just at a place where I was like, no treatment was working. I felt very isolated, alone, like nobody could relate. And the one gift I'd always had, like the common theme through my life, was creating. So I just started creating, and then eventually the podcast came along. And I just remember being so nervous, because it's often the things that aren't on your radar at first, or the things that make you feel the most uncomfortable, that end up being the things that have the most impact, especially as it relates to our story. So I definitely can relate to that. And you mentioned like your now husband kind of putting that nugget in your ear and you responding to that. And that kind of brings about the concept of like nobody's an island, like we need support. So can you talk about what it was like starting the podcast? And it might not being, you not being so sure necessarily, but still having that support. What kind of impact did that have on you?
Yeah, I would not have been able to do the podcast without that initial encouragement from Kyle, my husband, and also my best friend Cynthia, who I ended up getting to start the podcast with me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really feel that confidence in the beginning. I felt a huge sense of imposter syndrome, like who's going to listen to me and why me, like why do I feel like I need to do this? And so having my friend kind of help me start the podcast, and being that that thought partner, and that's person I could trust with this baby that I'm making kind of that really helped. And what's keeping me in it, because as you know, this can be very fulfilling work, but also it could be exhausting too. So like just keeping it sustainable and keeping yourself engaged and into it.
Mm-hmm.
I think what really keeps me going is my community, like people saying they value this, that they like, so the more people that say that they value this and they see that this is really helping them, the more I just want to keep going.
Yeah. And again, like you had so many points in what you just said that I think they touch on a lot of things as it relates to like accepting our personal journey with whatever circumstance we're living with. So for me, it's multiple invisible disabilities and albinism and being visually impaired. And it's for you, it's speaking differently, but like getting to a place where we first become like willing to embrace the journey of accepting it. And it's not, and most people think like acceptance comes first and then you start sharing and having an impact. But often what I found is no, you just start creating, or you start the thing that whatever it is you're called to do. And the thing that you think you're doing to serve other people ends up becoming part of your journey as well, in terms of how you see yourself. What are some things that having a podcast and hearing other people's stories while sharing your own, like what are some things that you've learned about yourself personally in this journey?
Oh my gosh, so much. And like I said at the beginning, like this show is as much for the stuttering community as it is for me. Like I feel like such a different person from when I started this to where I am now, because I feel like I just have this newfound sense of self, and I'm a lot more comfortable in my own skin. And with my, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say in my own skin, because I still have a lot of insecurities about that. But
Mhm.
as far as like my speech goes,
Yeah.
I'm a lot more comfortable with it. And I like when I started at the podcast and having to listen to myself over and over again through the editing process, that was torture.
Oh,
But now, but now I'm so used to it that I'm like, oh, it's just me stuttering. Like
yeah.
there's not that much emotion tied to it. It's more
Mhm.
of just like, oh, that's just me,
Yeah.
like, and now when I see myself like getting interviewed on TV and like in other podcasts and my own podcast, there isn't that like, oh god, like I sound like that, but I'm like, yes, that's me. So it's been a really positive impact on in my mental health as it relates to my speech, for sure.
That's awesome. And that kind of makes me reflect. Because I remember when I first started the Better Not Bitter podcast, I would go. It wasn't live, so I was literally going back and editing. And I remember it took me 4 hours to edit like 30 minutes because I was cutting out every. And with chronic migraine disease, I have something called speech aphasia. So like I'll either forget what I'm saying or my tongue will do this thing where it has a mind of its own. It's a weird phenomenon to describe. And like I would cut out every bout of that, and there were a lot of them. And then it kind of got to a point where, from a faith perspective, God was like, why are you hiding that? People need to see that. And I think over time, just becoming comfortable, even with, when I forget what I'm saying, or if I'm, tripping up on my speech, or if I entirely just am having a flare up moment, period, or a flare up instance, which is very often, like, not hiding that because people need to see it. And one of the things that I've learned over time is, like, as you grow in certain areas, you start seeing the thing that you are growing in all over the place. It's kind of like when you get a car, you start seeing the car that you have all over the place. And one of those things is just how masking, for me, I noticed that it contributes to this cycle where we hide whatever it is about us. For me, it's symptomology or having to use certain devices. And then people don't know about it. So I'm hiding a component of myself. And then people, continue to not understand. But then that forces me to start masking even more. And it's just like this vicious cycle that it doesn't end until we choose to do something different. And that thing that we choose is usually uncomfortable but worthwhile, as you've already stated. So we've talked about a lot, and it's only been a few minutes, but I am curious to know, not, we talked about the podcast, but just like um, from a philosophy perspective. So someone asked me the other day how I view, the things I live with. And, when it comes to disability, there are different models. I don't ascribe to any of them because they're all academic approaches to understanding things that happen with real people. But my question is, when you think of the way that you speak, how do you view it? Do you view it as a condition, a disability, just the way that you live? What is your perspective on it?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I feel like I don't really, it's hard to like find the words to
Mhm.
describe how I feel, but I am learning to embrace the disability part of stuttering. I struggle with that a little bit just because I went back in a forth of like, is stuttering a disability? And there's different forms of stuttering, like there's a lot of people that can't even really get their words out, and it takes just a lot more time to get their words out.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's like I'm still able to like go through life, but then at the same time, like I have gone punished at work for my
Mm-hmm.
speech, and certain situations where I wasn't given opportunities because of my speech. So in those instances, when I really think about it, I do think there is some level of disability in having a stutter, and I am bracing that more because I have been able to really build allyship with other organizations that are working in the disability justice space. But the term I really like to use is verbal diversity, because I find that I even relate to people that have like very thick accents,
Mm-hmm.
because they're afraid to talk in certain situations too, because they don't want to be judged for their accent. And so this term verbal diversity, I feel like it's a little narrower than disability, but a lot of people, like even speech aphasia could fall under that umbrella, if you know, as an example. But I'm really trying to like um connect with other people and organizations that have this like this verbal diversity connection.
Yeah, and I appreciate you for answering that. And part of my curiosity is because I'm in a lot of spaces where, it feels like every 2 to 3 years there's some new terminology coming out about this subset of the disability community or this subset of that. And the older I get, the more comfortable I am with, my physical makeup, the more I just recognize that I'm just built differently. And I think in society, we're so quick to slap a label on stuff when much of, being built differently is a spectrum. So like, even as you talked about with verbal diversity, like that includes verbal diversity and ethnicity as it does in occupation. Like there's so many cross points of impact in that it's impossible to just slap that term on anybody and expect the same results from one person to another. And that's what I think my goal as an advocate has become, is to highlight the fact, like, we're all just built differently, and the more comfortable we get with contextualizing that, one, in and of ourselves. So like, being visually impaired, I see things differently. A lot of my sight happens to be done with my ears. A lot of it happens to be done with my other senses, but that's not the case for everybody. And I think getting to a place where we can not only recognize it in ourselves and be content with that, because that's the big part, contentment with that, and then also being comfortable with that in other people, where we're not trying to change somebody else's condition because we feel uncomfortable because they have to use a wheelchair, or if they have to use a tablet to communicate verbal concepts, or if they need to use assistive technology. Like, we're not trying to change it because it makes us uncomfortable, but we're trying to learn from folks who navigate life differently from that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And um sorry, I like totally lost my train of thought.
No, you're good. It happens to me all the time. It's happened 3 times already to me. But I know that I mentioned just the concept of being built differently, and I think you were going to say something in response to that. If it comes back to you, great. If it doesn't, it's all good.
Yeah, I think I definitely can see like a lot of institutions trying to like box everyone into a certain space, like for example, the medical community is still kind of leading the narrative around stuttering, and a lot of the definitions that they have are like totally not like accurate at all. And I even got told once that because I had an artist, I partnered with an artist on an illustration about stuttering, and I had someone from the medical community say that that wasn't stuttering. And it was a piece of art. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is so ridiculous.
It's funny you say that though, because I've had my share of experiences with the medical community, or just the American model of medicine, as like a patient, and also as like an advocate. And I was at a speaking engagement for a very well-known school. I'm not going to put them out there like that. University, and I was speaking to their pediatric residency students. And before my portion where I spoke, there was a portion where they had some doctors and educators reading definitions and whatnot. And based on my tone of voice, you can assume where this goes. So I'm listening to their portion. They're still using the word handicap in this presentation, among many other words. And I'm sitting here, and then I had a friend of mine, a colleague of mine for an organization I collaborate with. She was there as a parent of a child with a disability, and we're looking at each other like, did they just? So as much as I wanted to let it slide in that moment, when it came time for them to, ask us questions, I felt like the burden to acknowledge, like, hey, that's not okay. And I'm not someone who gets into semantics, but I also believe that words matter, if you get what I mean. Like, how we think about certain things determines how we talk about them. And so, like, they didn't call me back after that engagement, but I felt a responsibility to let them know, like, you guys are going to be leading the charge in treating kids, and at least 20% of those kids that you treat from a medical perspective are going to have some form of, disability, or just living differently. And it gets even murkier when you consider like Medicare and Social Security and SSDI, like the terminology of what it means to be disabled. Like all of that's driven by the American model of medicine, which is very flawed in and of itself.
Yes.
But yeah, I can only imagine. I know what I've experienced in my, I guess, subset of those of us who walk the world differently, in an unmasked fashion. And I think it's very interesting that you started out the gate talking about the concept of accepting verbal diversity, as you articulated. But my other curiosity is, what was it like growing up for you? Like, how did you? Because I know I've had tactics that I've used to try to mask certain symptoms and different components of, being visually impaired and whatnot. But what were some of the things or the steps that you took to try to mask speaking differently?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I would be so terrified in any social situation growing up to have like a very attention grabbing stuttering moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I would do to avoid that is, as soon as I felt the stutter come, I would kind of just like either try to substitute a word that didn't really make that much sense, but it was better than stuttering. So then I felt like I wasn't coming off as intelligent, because like I didn't use that right word, but I wanted to use it because I knew I wouldn't stutter on it. So that's one masking strategy I had. And then another one would just be to avoid certain situations. Like I always wanted to try out for the school plays,
Mhm.
but I never did because I didn't want to stutter in front of like the theater people. And I would also mask by my speech would sometimes be a little distorted, where I would feel the stutter stop what I was saying and start again. And so that also um, I was insecure about, because I didn't want people to think I didn't know what I was saying. And so there was all of these, every time I'd mask, I would just get this feeling of like, people just don't get it. Like they're just they're just seeing me through how I speak, not what
Mhm.
I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And I'm sure, as with anything, I don't think media helps. um, how certain things are portrayed in movies, in TV shows, like different tropes, especially when it comes to either moving differently or speaking differently. Like those are the two main categories. Um, Anything involving the senses, like it's crazy the impact of what we take in and how it can inform how we see ourselves if we have that thing that is being portrayed on TV, or how other people see what we have, you know. And it's kind of like one of those things where it's like bittersweet. Like it provides an opportunity to have conversations with people, and at the same time, I know for me as an advocate, it does feel like one more thing that I now have to perform apologetics for, if that makes sense, or again.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's interesting that you mentioned, like there was a period of time where you wanted to be in theater, and so you didn't pursue that because you didn't want to have your verbal diversity showcased and then deal with some ridicule and blowback from that. And it's interesting because as you were talking about that, it made me think about moments in my life where there were things that I wanted to do, but I disqualified myself from doing them because I was like, if I do this, then this is going to happen and the people are going to do this. And it's only been the last year and some change that I've really been intentional in, whenever I even experience the notion or the thought of, I don't want to do this because I don't want to be further seen, involuntarily, that I've had to lean into those moments and do it anyway. Um, in your life, as just like a person, as someone who's married now, as a content creator, and someone I would deem as a public speaker and an advocate, like, do you still have moments where you're like, I attempted to mask, but let me not do that, let me do something different? Do you still have those moments?
Yeah, I mean, I still find myself masking a lot, which is like kind of so um yeah, it's a little counterintuitive, but I'm gonna be real. Like I still like in especially work situations, I
Mm-hmm.
find myself masking for many reasons. Like maybe I'm facilitating a meeting, we have to come to some sort of agreement by the end of the meeting. I
Mm-hmm.
have this sense of masking, so I'm not like taking up space, and like I'm just
Yeah.
trying to like move things along. So there's like still these very real moments where I'm like because with the world we operate in, it's like go go go. And so i'm
Yes.
i'm feeling like there's not, yes, like people know I stutter more and more, and yes, like there is this more sense of understanding, at least for the people that I interact with, but I
Mm-hmm.
still feel the societal pressures of like that go 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 mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And that go 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 mentality just does not work for people who stutter, because
Yeah.
like the more we feel like we need to speed up, the
Mm-hmm.
more we stutter. So it's just like that's been really hard as far as like
Mhm.
having this acceptance platform, but also dealing with like real life situations.
Mm, yeah, I appreciate you for sharing, because I think in many ways, ability or not, whether we speak differently, not, regardless of how we experience, being unique, like, I think in many ways we all navigate the temptation or the choice, um, to be fully authentic or just let it slide.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause especially,
Yes.
and while our experiences are very different, one thing I can relate to is that sense of anxiety when you feel like you're holding other people up because
Mm-hmm.
of how you're engaging with your environment. And like, I remember being in high school, one of the reasons why in college I ended up getting a separate setting testing accommodation is because in high school I would be one of the last people to finish. I'm testing in the same room with everyone else, but I had time and a half, so extended time. So I'd be taking my time, trying to do my best, go as fast as I can, and everybody's like turning around, looking at me like, "Is she done already? Do you know the anxiety that feels like?" Or even just, if I'm in a restaurant, or if someone's showing me something on their phone in passing, like, once you're aware your tendency to mask, then you feel kind of convicted when someone does something, because they'll show me something, and I'll be tempted to be like, "Oh yeah, that's nice," but that's lying, because I'm not seeing that at all, because you just went like this and I can't see in that matter of time. So I'm learning, even in those moments, seemingly small moments, to be like, "Nah, I can't see that cow on the side of the road. Like, they look like dots to me." But like, being honest and not responding in a way that I'm trying to control how other people feel based on how I am engaging with the environment around me. And it can be difficult when you're unlearning that.
Yeah, yeah, it's totally. It's like you might know it deep down, but like having it to experience it in real time is, yeah, it's hard.
And the funny thing, it's always interesting, because Pastor Roy and his family have taken me in, and I live with them. And to have a group of people that you've let into the in and outs, of your life, period, regardless of if it's trauma or how you like certain foods, or how you see. It's always interesting, because they know me so well now that if I was to try to do "oh yeah, no, I can," they know full and well that I can't. And that's a level of vulnerability too, like, to let people in close enough where they know you so well they can tell when you are just trying to get by in that moment instead of being fully authentic. Have you had any of those moments in your life?
Um, I mean, yeah, like with me and my husband, like, of course, my husband knows me well. Like, we've been t together for over 8 years, and
Oh wow.
yeah, and he could totally tell when I'm like, when I'm masking in a situation where it's like a social event or something.
Hmm.
Um, but I've gotten more comfortable asking for help more from him. Like, let's say we're at a restaurant and I want to order something.
Hmm.
I'll just be like, "Hey, can you just order for me?" I'm like, I'm like, I just don't feel like, you know, stuttering to the waiter and having them look at, I just didn't want it. So like I'm more comfortable kind of asking for help from him.
Hmm.
Um but yeah, and another thing that came up that's a little not exactly related to your question, but
Hmm.
a kind of a memory that just popped up is I recently became close with um this 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 woman who runs Afro LA. It's like a news organization for the Black community in LA, and it has a lot of intersectionalities to di- di- disability too. And I opened up to her about like my stutter, and then she opened up to me about like I had no idea, but she has an invisible disability and she doesn't really talk about it because of what you just said. She doesn't want to feel like a burden on others, and so
Mhm.
she has a cane and she sometimes walks with it, and she said that she almost never wants to walk with it because then it's showing that,
Yeah.
so like that really hit me, that there are probably so many people that we
Hmm.
just don't know their full story. And like, yeah.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that up because, like, um, from a community perspective, so if the disability community is a pie, there's different types, but there's the two larger, I guess, subsets of disability are visible or invisible. And it's funny because most of what people know of disability, most of what people are motivated or what motivates their engagement is based on the 5% that have visible disabilities. So some device, or, and I say stereotypical marker, not in terms of the disability itself, but how it's portrayed or expected, or the expectations of how that's supposed to be presented. But the rest of the community, the 95% is invisible. And as of last year, like, I became an ambassador for the Invisible Disabilities Association, and like, I didn't know up until October of 2021 that that was a thing. Like, I just knew I was experiencing multiple things that people couldn't see, and it made me feel like I was crazy because you couldn't see it, but I'm experiencing it. Even like, I have chronic migraine disease, hypermobility spectrum disorder, chronic fatigue syndrome, in addition to being visually impaired. But you get to a place where you adapt so well. And so it, truthfully, most of the time it's adapting to making other people comfortable, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't until maybe the last 2 years and some change where I've just really, like, nah, I'm just showing up how I show up. Like, I have smart crutches now, and they're basically pretty glorified forearm crutches that help me when I have very severe vertigo flare ups. But I'll be honest, I navigated some pride in purchasing them at the 24-year-old at the time last year. I was like, I don't want to be having to use crutches. And then, you know how things you say come back to convict you. I had a flashback to when I was talking to one of my mentees, and I was like, whatever it takes for you to get from point A to point B, or navigate, your life as interdependently as possible. Well, now I got to eat those words in a new way. And you might have accepted it with one area, but you never know how far along you are until something else comes along. And that was just the point of me learning, like, oh, you know what? If people are uncomfortable, that's them. Like, I can't control them, but I know these are helping me stand up and be present in this moment. And that's what really matters. Like, anything that allows me to be sober and present in whatever I'm called to do, like, it's beneficial for me.
Yeah. And I think this whole like acceptance term and this disability pride movement, they're very like awesome words, and like they have a lot of meaning, but I also think there's just, it's not black and white. Like you said, it's not like we accept it or we
Yeah.
don't. It's like we can accept it and still have our issues and still have
Yeah.
things that we're dealing with that we don't totally accept. So I wish there was like a more
And it's
conversation around that.
and it's funny you said that because I don't celebrate Disability Pride Month. But the
Yeah.
main reason I don't is because, one, the foundation of my faith, like, if this is the way that God made me, this is my original design, it's not necessarily something for me to be shameful of, nor so prideful in. It is something for me to appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like, there's dangers to either extreme, but I think the balance of appreciation, and appreciation is not an emotion. Appreciation is a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because acceptance, that happens when we feel good, right? That happens when we're happy, like we've had an impact on somebody. And then pride is like when we're kind of overcompensating at times because there's still parts of our story that we don't feel comfortable with. But appreciation, I think there's balance in that because it's not an emotion, it's a decision. Like, I don't feel XYZ because of this symptom or what I'm experiencing as it relates to how I navigate the world. But that doesn't change that my presence matters. That doesn't change that when I show up to events or when I show up in relationships, when I show up to my commitments and opportunities, I still get to have an impact because I'm showing up just as I am. And through showing up and making that choice to appreciate, it doesn't mean like those pitfalls don't come. It means that as they come, it's a choice to navigate those moments. One, it benefits us when we choose to deal with those triggers and the things that we're not comfortable with. And it's a process. And two, it also benefits the people around us. At a speaking engagement that I spoke at on Saturday, and one thing I said, it's funny the amount of times I thought withholding what I was experiencing from the people around me, I thought I was protecting them.
Mm-hmm.
But now I realize as I continue to share, layer after layer of my story, and there's a lot of layers, but as I continue to share, I was not protecting them. I thought I was protecting my heart from their response if they didn't respond the way I needed or thought they should have. And now the more that I share, I realize people around me benefit whether they respond in a positive or negative way to me or not. They're still benefiting from me having been in that room, from me having communicated the very real aspects of navigating PTSD and chronic migraine. They're still benefiting from that, but I can't control their response. And so that's where I lie. I wish there was more so just like appreciation for like our original physical makeup, and even for those who develop, disability after birth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it's a healthier way to grow to appreciate something, because you can appreciate somebody but not co-sign every bit of their behaviors. Like,
Yeah.
you might appreciate your sibling, but they still might get on your nerves. But like, even when we might appreciate that we've made it through, the trauma that we've navigated, and we're still standing, but it was still trauma. you know so whatever the case might be, I just think that that's a healthier middle ground, and it brings about the concept of expectation versus reality. Like, we can tell ourselves things all we want, but sometimes emotions aren't enough to motivate us. Sometimes we need to hold on to things that are more firm, and one of those firmer things is that your presence matters. Whether you speak differently, whether you hear differently, whether you communicate differently, whether you utilize a wheelchair, whether you utilize crutches, like, regardless of how you need to get from point A to point B or accomplish this goal from a physiological perspective, like, your presence matters. And so does the parts of your journey that led up to this point, But those are just my thoughts.
No, I love that. I'd never really thought about appreciation in that sort of way. So I'm definitely gonna think about that more, because I think it's really an important concept for sure.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about a lot of things, and I think, if you're available for more conversations, we definitely can have more conversations. But there's one question I always ask everyone who comes onto the podcast. But before I ask that, I want to ask one more question before that. And that is, if there's something you could tell, the audience or people who might not understand what verbal diversity is, what would you like to communicate to them?
Yeah, I think I would say that with stuttering, like I haven't really had the choice to not be vulnerable with a stutter, because every time I talk, I'm showing my vulnerability. And so that is just a part of the stuttering experience that I think I just really wanted to share.
Mm-hmm.
And every time we speak and stutter, like me and like others have expressed this too, we go back to that moment where we had the most negative experience, or
Mm-hmm.
we go back to that classroom where people made fun of you. It's like this reoccurring trauma that's happening over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's my experience, and I'm not saying everyone experiences that who's stutter,
Mm-hmm.
but that's just kind of what we're dealing with. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I know that's kind of dark, but
No, I mean, to be honest, I appreciate your transparency there. And for those who don't know, I also navigate, well, experiencing PTSD because of childhood trauma. So, like this past week, I just had an instance where I was in a place that reminded me of certain aspects of my childhood trauma. And I had to, like, it's almost like I experienced those emotions that my brain and my heart wouldn't allow me to experience because they were protecting me all those years ago. So I know firsthand what it's like to have what we call like a tape recorder playing in the back of your mind of things that happened a while ago. And one thing I've been learning through therapy and just communicating with family, like, is the value of, at least for me, allowing it to pass through me. Because I think I was blocked up for so long in many instances that I just shut down because I thought shutting my brain and my body and my heart thought shutting down was easier than, you know, seeing that happen again. So I appreciate you sharing, and I, while it's not the same thing, please hear me when I say I do understand the integrity of what you're talking about, and I think even in when you said, I hope that's not too dark. Like, I think we need to be able to talk about those things more, because even if it has a tinge of being heavy, like, part of the reason why it's heavy is because we carry it ourselves. And if we had more spaces where, especially like in our inner circle or in our communities, where we could conversate about those things, it would have less of a tinge of heaviness and more of, you know what, I'm just going to be honest. Yes, this is awkward. It feels weird to communicate, but like, it is what it is. And I think there's freedom in being able to say, this is what it is, or it is what it was, depending on where we are in our journey. So thank you for sharing. All right, now we'll get on to the last question, and that is, what or who has helped you to become better and not bitter?
I'm gonna just say the stuttering community that I've built with starting the podcast, like um they just continue to like recharge me with like how actually lucky I am to have a stutter, because if I didn't, I wouldn't have met all these amazing people over the past 2 years. So I'll say that as my answer.
That's awesome. I can relate to this, especially like having all my conditions that I have are rare. But like when you find people who get it, where you don't have to explain, they just get it. It just feels good. That's all I can say. So without further ado, everyone, thank you for watching this live or throughout the replay or even in the smaller bits of content that this will become. And we appreciate that you chose to join us in having this conversation. And as I always say, remember to become better and not bitter one day at a time. Peace.